Daniel Brooks froze mid-step, his hand still gripping the pool skimmer as the glass door slid open behind him. She stood there in the morning light, wrapped in nothing but a towel that hung dangerously loose at her collarbone. Lila Hart's eyes weren't pleading or seductive. They were drowning. This wasn't an invitation. This was a test, a desperate question thrown at the only person who'd looked at her like she was human in months. In 3 seconds, Daniel would make a choice that would either save them both or destroy everything he'd built for his daughter. The water rippled between them, reflecting a moment that could never be taken back. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happened next changed 2 lives forever. Daniel Brooks had been cleaning pools for 7 years, and in that time he'd developed a very specific philosophy. Never look too closely at the lives happening behind the glass doors. The gleaming estates of Riverside Heights weren't his world. They were just his paycheck, the thing that kept the lights on in the small 2-bedroom apartment he shared with his 6-year-old daughter, Emma. Tuesday mornings always started the same. Emma's alarm at 6:15, her sleepy protests as he coaxed her out of bed, the careful ritual of braiding her dark hair while she ate cereal at their wobbly kitchen table. She'd ask him questions, always questions, about everything from why the sky changed colors to whether fish got thirsty. Daniel answered every single one, even when he was running late, even when his back already ached from yesterday's work. "Daddy, why do rich people need so many pools?" Emma had asked that morning, swinging her legs under the table. Daniel smiled, tightening the elastic around her braid. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe they like having options." "That's silly. You can only swim in one at a time." "You're absolutely right," he said, kissing the top of her head, "which is why you're smarter than most of the people I work for." He dropped her at school at 7:30, watched her disappear through the doors with her backpack bouncing, then drove his aging Toyota truck toward the hills where the houses grew larger and the lawns more perfect. His company, Crystal Clear Pool Services, had 43 clients spread across 3 zip codes. Daniel handled the northern route, the quietest one, the one where people were usually at work when he arrived. The Hart residence was his 3rd stop that morning. 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, a modern architectural statement in glass and stone, perched on a hillside with a view that probably cost more than Daniel would earn in a lifetime. The infinity pool stretched toward the valley below, creating the illusion that you could swim straight into the sky. Daniel had been servicing this property for 3 months. The work order had come through in January, a standard weekly maintenance contract. He'd met the homeowner exactly once. Marcus Hart, a man in his late 50s with silver temples and the kind of commanding presence that made you instinctively straighten your posture. Marcus had given Daniel a firm handshake, a brief tour of the pool equipment, and explicit instructions about maintaining the precise chemical balance. "I entertain clients here frequently," Marcus had said, his tone making it clear this was more warning than explanation. "The pool needs to be immaculate, always." Daniel had nodded, asked the relevant questions about the filtration system, and filed the job away as another high-maintenance client who'd probably never speak to him again. He'd been half right. Marcus was never there, but someone else was. The first time Daniel saw Lila Hart, she was a blur of white fabric disappearing around the corner of the house. He'd assumed she was hired help, maybe a housekeeper or personal assistant. The second time, she was sitting on the covered patio, legs tucked beneath her, staring at a book she didn't seem to be reading. She wore oversized sunglasses that hid half her face, and she didn't acknowledge his presence at all. That pattern continued for weeks. Daniel would arrive, punch in the gate code, set up his equipment, and work in near total silence while this mysterious woman occupied the edges of his peripheral vision. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30, delicate features, honey blonde hair usually pulled back in a loose ponytail, skin that rarely saw direct sunlight. She moved through the space like a ghost, present but deliberately absent. Daniel didn't try to make conversation. That wasn't his job. His job was to test pH levels, skim leaves, vacuum the pool floor, check the pump pressure, balance the chemicals, and leave everything pristine. He was good at his job, methodical, invisible. But invisibility, he had learned, was a double-edged sword. When you're invisible, you see things other people miss. You notice the wine glass left by the pool edge at 9 in the morning, The way someone sits in the same chair for 2 hours without moving. The subtle flinch when a phone rings. It was the beginning of April when things shifted. Daniel was testing the chlorine levels, noting the readings in his logbook, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find her standing closer than she'd ever been before. No sunglasses this time, arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the morning. "Hi," she said quietly. Her voice was softer than he'd expected, with a slight hoarseness that suggested disuse. "Morning, ma'am," Daniel replied, keeping his tone professional and neutral. "You don't have to call me ma'am. I'm Lila." "Daniel," he offered, then immediately felt stupid. His name was embroidered on his work shirt. Of course she could read it. She smiled slightly, as if she'd caught his thought. "I know. I've seen you here every Tuesday for months now. I finally thought I should actually introduce myself instead of pretending you're invisible." "I don't mind being invisible," Daniel said, honestly. "Makes the work easier." "I'm sure it does." She looked at the pool, then back at him. "Do you ever swim in the pools you clean?" The question caught him off guard. "No, ma'am, Lila, not part of the job description." "But you know how to swim." "I do." "When's the last time you went swimming?" Daniel thought about it. "Probably 5 years ago. Took my daughter to the public pool for her birthday." Something flickered in Lila's expression. Interest, maybe, or recognition. "You have a daughter." "Emma, she's 6. "That's a good age." Lila's smile turned wistful. "Still asks a million questions, I bet." "Every single day," Daniel confirmed, feeling himself relax slightly. "Wants to know how everything works, why everything is the way it is." "Do you know all the answers?" "Not even close, but I try." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. A bird called somewhere in the garden. The pool filter hummed steadily. "I should let you get back to work," Lila said finally, but she didn't move immediately. "It's nice to talk to someone. This house gets very quiet." "Doesn't Mr. Hart work from home?" "Marcus is rarely home. He has a office downtown, meetings in LA, clients in San Francisco. This house is more of a showcase than a home. Beautiful things to look at, nothing that actually lives here." The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Daniel recognized it. The sound of someone trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt empty from within. He'd heard variations of it before, in the spaces between professional exchanges with other clients, in the careful way people sometimes asked about his simple life with what they thought was envy but was really just tourism. "Well," Daniel said carefully, "the pool's in great shape. That's something." Lila laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. "Yes, the pool is definitely perfect. Thank you for that." She walked away then, back toward the house, and Daniel returned to his work. But something had shifted. The invisible wall between service provider and client had developed a crack. The following Tuesday, Lila was waiting when he arrived. She sat at the patio table with a glass of iced tea, watching as Daniel unloaded his equipment from the truck. When he glanced her way, she raised her glass slightly in greeting. He nodded back and began his routine. 10 minutes later, a second glass of iced tea appeared on the small table near the pool equipment shed. Daniel looked over to find Lila back in her chair, reading or pretending to read her book. "Thank you," he called across the pool. "It's hot today," she replied without looking up. "Seemed like you could use it." Daniel picked up the glass, condensation cool against his palm, and took a long drink. It was perfect, not too sweet, with fresh mint and a slice of lemon. Whoever had made this actually cared about making it right. "Did you make this yourself?" he asked. Now she looked up. "Why? Does that surprise you?" "Most people I work for don't make their own anything." "I'm not most people." Her tone wasn't defensive, just factual. "I don't have much else to do with my time." Daniel wanted to ask what she meant by that, but stopped himself. Not his business, not his life. He was the pool guy, nothing more. But Lila seemed determined to blur those boundaries. Over the next few weeks, she began timing her days around his visits. She'd be outside when he arrived, working in the garden, or reading on the patio. Always nearby, always available for conversation, but never demanding it. Their exchanges were brief at first, Comments about the weather, observations about the garden, questions about Emma that Daniel answered carefully, aware he was revealing pieces of his life to someone who was essentially a stranger. "What does Emma want to be when she grows up?" Lila asked one morning while Daniel was skimming leaves from the surface. "Changes every week," he said with a smile. "Last month, it was astronaut. This week, it's veterinarian who also solves mysteries. A very specific career path. She likes options, doesn't want to be limited to just one thing." "Smart girl. Sounds like she gets that from you." Daniel paused in his work, looking at Lila with genuine curiosity. "What makes you say that?" "You notice things. Most people in your position would just do the job and leave, but you pay attention. I've watched you adjust the chemical balance differently depending on the weather, check the pool lights, even though that's not technically your job, fix the gate latch when it was sticking. You don't just maintain things, you care about them working properly." He felt oddly exposed by her observation. "Just seems like the right way to do the work." Most people don't think that way anymore. They do the minimum required, collect their paycheck, move on. Lila set down her book. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough." She took a breath. "Do you ever feel trapped by your life?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications Daniel didn't want to examine too closely. He set down the skimmer, giving her his full attention. "Trapped how?" "Like you're doing all the right things, making all the responsible choices, being who everyone needs you to be, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being who you actually are." Daniel understood exactly what she meant, but admitting it felt dangerous. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes. Part of being an adult." That's a very diplomatic answer. It's an honest one. He picked up the skimmer again, needing something to do with his hands. "I've got a daughter who depends on me. That means I don't get to make choices based on what I want. I make choices based on what she needs. It's not about feeling trapped, it's about priorities." "And what about what you need?" "I need her to be safe, happy, and taken care of. Everything else is secondary." Lila was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "That's very admirable. Also very lonely." "Who says I'm lonely?" "I do, because I recognize it." She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth. "I should go inside. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable." "You didn't," Daniel said, surprising himself with the truth. "You just asked questions I don't usually answer." "Why did you answer them with me?" He didn't have a good response to that. Lila seemed to understand, offering a small smile before disappearing into the house. May brought warmer weather and a subtle escalation in their dynamic. Lila started asking Daniel questions about his work beyond just the pool maintenance, where else he worked, what his schedule was like, whether he enjoyed the job or just needed it. He answered more freely now, no longer keeping the strict professional distance he maintained with other clients. In return, Lila began revealing fragments of her own story. She'd met Marcus at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago. She'd been working in marketing for a nonprofit. He was one of the major donors. The courtship had been intense and quick, expensive dinners, weekend trips, the kind of attention that felt overwhelming and flattering in equal measure. They'd moved in together within 6 months. "He made me feel seen," Lila explained one afternoon while Daniel was cleaning the filter baskets. "After spending my whole life feeling invisible, someone actually noticed me, wanted to take care of me. It felt like being saved. And now? Now I realize there's a difference between being saved and being kept." She drew her knees up to her chest, looking younger than her years. "Marcus is a good man in his way. He's not cruel or abusive. He just doesn't see me anymore. I've become another beautiful thing in his collection, something to maintain and display but not actually connect with." Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Have you talked to him about it? How do you tell someone they've stopped seeing you without sounding ungrateful? He gives me everything I could possibly need. This house, financial security, a comfortable life. What right do I have to complain about being lonely?" "Every right," Daniel said quietly. "Money doesn't fix loneliness, neither do things." "Spoken like someone who actually knows what matters." "Spoken like someone who's made plenty of mistakes," Daniel corrected. "I'm not wise, Lila. I'm just a guy trying to do right by his kid." "Where's her mother?" The question was inevitable, but it still made Daniel's chest tighten. "Gone." Left when Emma was 18 months old. Said she wasn't ready to be a mother, needed to find herself, all the usual lines. Sent divorce papers from Arizona. I haven't heard from her in over 4 years. I'm sorry. Don't be. Emma's better off. Kids know when they're not wanted. At least this way she doesn't have to feel that rejection every day. He paused, then added, plus she's got me, and I'm not going anywhere. Lucky girl. I'm the lucky one. She gives me a reason to keep showing up, keep trying, keep being better than I was yesterday. Daniel picked up his testing kit. That's more than a lot of people have. Lila watched him work for a while, not speaking but not leaving either. The silence between them had become comfortable, familiar, too familiar maybe. When Daniel finished and began packing up his equipment, Lila stood and walked closer. Not inappropriately close, but close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and expensive. Thank you, she said. For what? Cleaning your pool? For treating me like a person instead of a decoration, for listening without judging, for being real. She looked up at him, and Daniel saw something in her eyes that made his pulse quicken. Not desire exactly, but recognition. I look forward to Tuesdays now. That probably sounds pathetic, but it's true. It doesn't sound pathetic, Daniel said carefully. But Lila, I need you to understand something. I can't be what you're looking for. I can't be your friend in any way that matters outside of these Tuesday mornings. I've got a job to protect, a daughter to raise. I can't risk either of those things. I know. I'm not asking you to risk anything. She trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. I just wanted you to know that you make a difference. Even if you don't mean to. Even if it's just by being decent and honest and showing up every week. That matters to me. Before Daniel could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing by the pool with a growing sense that he was walking a very dangerous line. The first week of June changed everything. Daniel arrived at the Hart residence at his usual time, 9:30 on a Tuesday morning. The gate was already open, which was unusual but not unheard of. Sometimes the gardeners or other maintenance workers had appointments that overlapped with his. He parked the truck, grabbed his equipment, and headed toward the pool. Lila wasn't on the patio. Also unusual, she'd been there to greet him every week for the past 2 months. He set up his testing equipment and began his routine, trying to ignore the disappointment that flickered through him. This was better anyway. Safer. Less complicated. 15 minutes later, he heard the glass door slide open. Sorry I'm late, Lila called. Her voice sounded different, strained, emotional. I was on the phone. Daniel glanced up and felt his stomach drop. Lila stood in the doorway, and she'd clearly been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara smudged beneath them. She wore a silk robe that hung loose on her frame, and she was gripping a wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white. Are you okay? The words came out before Daniel could stop them. Fine, she said, the obvious lie brittle in the morning air. Everything's fine. Perfect, actually. Just had a lovely conversation with my fiancé about postponing the wedding again because his schedule is too demanding right now. 3rd time he's pushed the date. But it's fine. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Daniel could see that from across the pool. He should have stayed where he was. Should have offered some platitude and gone back to work. Should have maintained the boundary he'd explicitly told her existed. Instead, he set down his testing kit and walked around the pool toward her. Lila, maybe you should sit down. I don't want to sit down. The wine sloshed in her glass as she gestured wildly. I'm tired of sitting down, of being patient, of waiting for my life to actually start. Do you know what Marcus said when I asked him if we were ever actually going to get married? He said, eventually, when the time is right. Like I'm a business deal he's waiting to close at the optimal moment. Daniel stopped a few feet away, hands raised in a calming gesture. I know you're upset, but drinking this early probably isn't... Don't, she said sharply. Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't do. Everyone in my life tells me what to do, how to act, how to be grateful for what I have. You're the only person who's never done that. Don't start now. Okay, Daniel said quietly. I won't, but I'm going to suggest that maybe you should call a friend, someone who can be here with you. I don't have friends, Lila laughed, the sound harsh and broken. I have Marcus's colleagues' wives who I'm polite with at dinner parties. I have a mother who calls once a month to ask if I've set a date yet. I have you, the pool guy who shows up every Tuesday and treats me like I'm worth talking to. That's it. That's my entire social circle. She drained the rest of the wine, set the glass down on the patio table with a sharp crack, and looked at Daniel with desperate, drowning eyes. Do you know what it's like to be invisible? She asked. To live in a glass house where everyone can see you, but nobody actually looks at you? I could disappear tomorrow and Marcus wouldn't notice until he needed me to host a dinner party. I'm 29 years old and my life is already over. Your life isn't over, Daniel said firmly. You're hurt and angry right now, and you have every right to be. But this isn't permanent. You have choices. Do I? What choices exactly? Leave Marcus and go where? I gave up my job when we moved in together. I have no money of my own, no career, no place to go. I signed a prenup that guarantees I get nothing if I leave. I'm trapped in a beautiful cage and the door isn't even locked. I just have nowhere else to go. Daniel's heart broke for her, but he also knew he was in dangerous territory. This level of emotional vulnerability, this kind of raw honesty, it created bonds that could too easily become something else. Lila, I think you should call someone. A therapist, a crisis line. Even your mother, someone who can actually help you. You help me, she interrupted, taking a step closer. Just by being here, just by listening. You're the only real thing in my life, Daniel. The only person who doesn't want something from me, who doesn't need me to be anything other than what I am. That's not true. I'm your pool guy. That's all I am, all I can be. Is it? She was close enough now that he could see the tears gathering in her eyes again. Because I think you feel it too. This connection between us. I think you look forward to Tuesdays just like I do. I think you notice me the same way I notice you. Even if that were true, Daniel said carefully. It doesn't matter. You're engaged. I have a daughter. We're living completely different lives. So we can't even acknowledge what's happening here. We have to pretend it's nothing. It is nothing. It has to be nothing. Liar. The word was soft, not accusatory. You're lying to yourself as much as to me. Before Daniel could respond, Lila reached up and touched his face, her palm cool against his cheek. The gesture was gentle, questioning, giving him every opportunity to pull away. He should have. Every instinct, every responsible thought screamed at him to step back, put distance between them, end this before it went any further. But he didn't move. Couldn't move. Because Lila was right. He had felt it. This pull between them. This recognition of two people drowning in their separate lives who'd found an unexpected lifeline in each other. Daniel, she whispered, and the way she said his name made his chest ache. Then she let her hand drop, and the spell broke. I'm sorry, Lila said, stepping back quickly. I shouldn't have. That was inappropriate. You should go. Just leave the pool. I'll pay the full fee, but you should... Lila, stop. Daniel caught her arm gently, stopping her retreat. Don't apologize for being honest. Don't apologize for being human. You're hurting, and you reached out for connection. That's not wrong. But you're right that this can't be anything, she said miserably. I know you're right. I just wanted someone to see me, really see me, and you do. But that doesn't change anything about our lives, does it? No, Daniel admitted. It doesn't. They stood there in the morning sunlight, two people separated by circumstances but connected by something neither of them could name. Finally, Daniel released her arm and took a deliberate step backward. I'm going to finish my work, he said. You're going to go inside, take a shower, eat something, and call someone who can actually be there for you. And next Tuesday, we're going to pretend this conversation never happened. Can you do that? Lila nodded slowly. Can you? I'll have to. She walked toward the house without another word, but paused at the door to look back at him one last time. For what it's worth, Daniel, you're a good man. Emma's lucky to have you. Then she was gone, and Daniel was alone with the pool and the weight of everything unsaid between them. He finished his work on autopilot, testing chemicals and adjusting levels, while his mind replayed every word of their conversation. When he was done, he packed up his equipment and drove away from 2847 Meadowbrook Lane with a growing certainty that he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. That evening, Daniel sat on the floor of his living room with Emma, helping her build an elaborate city out of blocks. She chattered constantly about her day, who sat with whom at lunch, what they learned about butterflies, why her teacher said sharing was important, but Tommy never shared his markers. "Daddy, you're not listening," Emma said, poking his arm. "I am, sweetheart. You were talking about Tommy and the markers. That was 5 minutes ago. I'm talking about the field trip now. Are you okay? You seem sad." Daniel pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her small frame. "I'm okay, Em. Just thinking about work stuff. Was somebody mean to you?" "No, nothing like that. Just complicated adult things." Emma twisted to look up at him, her expression serious beyond her years. "Mom left because things got complicated, didn't she?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. They didn't talk about her mother often. Emma rarely asked, and Daniel didn't volunteer information that would only hurt her. "Why are you asking about that now?" "Jenna at school said her dad left because he met someone else. She said adults leave when they find something they want more than their family. Is that what happened with Mom?" Daniel took a shaky breath, choosing his words carefully. "Your mom left because she wasn't ready to be a parent. That's not your fault. And it's not because she found something she wanted more. It's because she didn't understand what she already had. She didn't understand how incredible you are. But you won't leave, right? Even if things get complicated?" "Never. I promise you, Emma. No matter what happens, no matter how complicated things get, I will never leave you. You're the most important thing in my life, and nothing is more important than being your dad." She hugged him tightly, her small arms barely reaching around his torso. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything in the whole world." As he held his daughter, Daniel made a decision. Whatever was happening with Lila, whatever this connection between them meant, it couldn't matter. Emma had already lost one parent who chose their own needs over her. Daniel wouldn't give her a father who did the same thing. He would go back next Tuesday. He would do his job professionally and politely. And he would make absolutely certain that the line he'd almost crossed today remained uncrossed, no matter how much it hurt to maintain that distance. Because some things mattered more than what you wanted. Some responsibilities were more important than your own loneliness. Some lines, once crossed, destroyed everything you'd built. And Daniel had too much to lose to let that happen. Daniel spent the rest of that week convincing himself he'd made the right choice. Every time his mind drifted back to that moment on Lila's patio, her hand on his face, the desperate hope in her eyes, he forced himself to think about Emma instead. Her questions about her mother, her fear that he might leave too, the absolute trust she placed in him every single day. That trust was sacred. He wouldn't betray it for anything, not even the ache of connection he'd felt with someone who seemed to understand the particular loneliness of going through life unseen. Monday night, he barely slept. He kept running through scenarios for Tuesday morning, planning what he'd say if Lila tried to talk to him, how he'd maintain professional distance without being cruel. Maybe she wouldn't even be there. Maybe she'd realize, like he had, that whatever was happening between them needed to stop before it became something neither of them could control. When Tuesday morning arrived, Daniel went through his routine with Emma in a fog of anxiety. She noticed, of course. Emma noticed everything. "You're quiet today, Daddy," she said, watching him pour milk over her cereal with too much concentration. "Just tired, sweetheart. Is it because of your work stuff? The complicated things?" Daniel crouched down to her eye level, smoothing her hair back from her face. "You don't need to worry about grown-up stuff, okay? That's my job. Your job is to be 6 years old and learn about butterflies and share your markers even when Tommy doesn't share his." She giggled at that, some of the concern leaving her eyes. "Tommy did share yesterday. He let me use the red one. See? Things work out." If only he believed that himself. He dropped Emma at school and drove toward Riverside Heights with his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The morning was overcast, unusual for early June, and the gray light made everything feel muted and strange. When he pulled up to 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, the gate was closed. He punched in the code and waited for it to swing open, his heart hammering against his ribs. The house looked exactly the same as always. Glass and stone and perfect landscaping. No cars in the driveway except his truck. No sign of life except the automatic sprinklers making their measured rounds across the lawn. Daniel unloaded his equipment and walked to the pool, half expecting Lila to be sitting on the patio waiting for him. She wasn't. The space was empty. the furniture arranged precisely as it had been when he'd left last week. He set up his testing equipment and got to work, telling himself he was relieved by her absence, even as disappointment settled heavy in his chest. He'd been working for maybe 20 minutes when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Lila approaching from the house, and his relief at seeing her was immediate and terrifying. She looked different than she had last week, composed. Her hair was pulled back neatly, makeup carefully applied to hide any evidence of tears. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse, nothing like the silk robe and emotional devastation of their last encounter. When she got close enough for him to see her expression, he found it carefully neutral. "Good morning," she said, her tone perfectly polite and distant. "Morning," Daniel replied, matching her formality. They stood there for a moment, the air between them thick with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Lila took a breath and met his eyes directly. "I owe you an apology for last week. I was upset and I drank too much and I put you in an extremely uncomfortable position. That was unfair and unprofessional, and I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize." "I do," she interrupted firmly. "You have a job to do, and I made that job difficult by blurring boundaries that should have stayed clear. It won't happen again. From now on, I'll make sure to give you space to work without any interference from me." Daniel should have felt relieved. This was exactly what he'd wanted. A clean reset, professional distance, no more dangerous conversations that pulled them towards something neither could afford. Instead, he felt the loss of something he'd never actually had. "Lila, you didn't do anything wrong. You were having a hard day, and I made it your problem. That's not fair to you." She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture he'd seen her make before. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how you can't be what I'm looking for. You were right. I was using our conversations as a substitute for actually dealing with my life, and that's not fair to either of us." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll stay out of your way while you work. You don't need to worry about me making things awkward anymore." With that, she turned and walked back toward the house, her posture rigid with determination. Daniel watched her go, feeling like he'd just lost something important, even though he'd never really had it to begin with. He finished his work in silence, the overcast morning matching his mood. When he packed up his equipment and left, Lila didn't come out to say goodbye. The following Tuesday was the same. Lila was nowhere to be seen when he arrived, and she didn't appear at all during his visit. The house felt hollow, lifeless in a way it hadn't before. Daniel told himself this was better, safer, the right way for things to be. He almost believed it. The third Tuesday in June, he arrived to find a note taped to the gate keypad. It was written in neat, feminine handwriting he recognized immediately. "Daniel, the pool needs some repairs that Marcus wants to handle through a different company. We'll contact you when we're ready to resume regular service. Thank you for your work. LH." Daniel read the note 3 times, looking for hidden meaning in the careful words, but there was nothing there except a clear dismissal. Lila had found a way to remove him from her life entirely, and she'd done it in the most considerate way possible, giving him a professional excuse that wouldn't cost him the account, just a temporary pause that might become permanent. He sat in his truck for a long time, staring at the house through the gate. Part of him wanted to call the number on file, ask to speak to Mr. Hart directly, confirm that there really were repairs needed. Another part knew that would be crossing a line he'd worked so hard to maintain. Finally, he put the truck in gear and drove away, the note tucked in his pocket like evidence of something that had almost happened, but hadn't. He didn't tell anyone about it. Not his supervisor at Crystal Clear, not the other guys on his route who sometimes asked about the fancy houses he serviced, especially not Emma, who wouldn't have understood why her father seemed quieter than usual, more distant, like part of him was somewhere else even when he was sitting right next to her. 3 weeks passed. Daniel's Tuesdays developed a new routine that didn't include Meadowbrook Lane. His supervisor had assigned him a replacement account, a family with young kids who left the pool area cluttered with toys and required twice as much cleaning time. It was fine, it was work, it paid the same. But every Tuesday morning, Daniel found himself thinking about Lila, wondering if she was sitting on that patio alone, if Marcus had actually postponed the wedding again, if she'd found someone else to talk to, or if she'd just retreated further into her beautiful cage. He told himself it didn't matter, that it was better this way, that he'd done the right thing by maintaining boundaries, by choosing his daughter's stability over his own loneliness. All of that was true. It still hurt. The fourth Tuesday in June, Daniel was finishing up at the house with the toy-cluttered pool when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hello? Daniel, this is Marcus Hart. Daniel's stomach dropped. He pulled the phone away from his ear to check the number again, as if that would change who was calling. Mr. Hart, how can I help you? I understand you've been servicing our pool for the past several months. I wanted to call personally to let you know we're ready to resume regular maintenance. The repairs are complete, and we'd like you back on the Tuesday schedule starting next week if that works for you. Of course, Daniel said automatically, his mind racing. I can be there at the usual time. Excellent. I appreciate your flexibility during the pause. Oh, and Daniel, I wanted to mention, Lila speaks very highly of your work. She said you're thorough and professional, and she appreciates the care you take with the property. That kind of attention to detail is rare. I wanted you to know it's noticed. There was something in Marcus Hart's tone that made the hair on the back of Daniel's neck stand up. Not quite accusatory, but pointed, deliberate, like he was saying something else underneath the professional courtesy. I appreciate that, Mr. Hart. I take pride in my work. I'm sure you do. We'll see you Tuesday then. The line went dead before Daniel could respond. He stood there holding his phone, trying to parse the subtext of that conversation. Had Lila told Marcus something? Had Marcus suspected something? Or was Daniel just paranoid, reading meaning into a simple professional exchange? He didn't know. All he knew was that in 7 days he'd be back at that house, and he had no idea what he'd find there. The week crawled by. Emma seemed to sense his distraction, asking more questions than usual about why he was so quiet, whether he was sick, if something was wrong. Daniel reassured her over and over that everything was fine, hating himself a little more each time he lied. When Tuesday finally arrived, he was almost relieved. At least the waiting would be over. At least he'd know what he was walking into. The drive to Riverside Heights felt longer than usual. Every red light seemed to last forever. When he finally pulled up to 2847 Meadowbrook Lane and punched in the gate code, his hands were actually shaking. The gate swung open. Daniel drove through and parked in his usual spot. The house looked the same as always, immaculate, expensive, untouchable. He gathered his equipment and walked to the pool, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in his peripheral vision. Lila was sitting on the patio. She stood when she saw him, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the expanse of water and stone. She looked thinner than she had 6 weeks ago, her face drawn despite the makeup, but her expression was calm, almost serene, like she'd made some decision and found peace in it. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi, T." Daniel set down his equipment, not sure what else to say. Mr. Hart called, said the repairs were finished. There were no repairs. That was just an excuse. I know. I needed some space, time to figure things out. Lila walked closer, stopping on her side of the pool. I've spent the past month in therapy. Real therapy, 3 times a week with someone who specializes in relationship dynamics and codependency. That's good. I'm glad you're getting help. I told Marcus I needed it or I was leaving. That was the first real boundary I've set with him in 3 years. Do you want to know what he said? Daniel wasn't sure he did, but he nodded anyway. He said fine, not what's wrong, or how can I help, just fine, if that's what you need, like it was another item to check off a list. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. My therapist says I've been using emotional unavailability as a form of self-harm, staying with someone who doesn't see me because it confirms what I already believe about myself, that I'm not worth seeing. That's not true. Let me finish, she said gently. Please. I've been practicing this for weeks, and if I don't say it now, I might lose my nerve. Daniel closed his mouth and waited. What happened between us? What almost happened? It woke something up in me. Made me realize I've been sleepwalking through my own life, accepting scraps of attention and calling it love. You treated me like a person. You listened when I talked. You saw me, really saw me, and you didn't want anything from me except maybe honest conversation. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Lila, I'm not finished. She took a shaky breath. My therapist asked me what I wanted, not what Marcus wants, not what my mother expects, not what makes sense financially or practically, just what I want. And I realized I didn't know. I've been so focused on being what other people need that I forgot to figure out who I actually am. So what are you going to do? I'm leaving Marcus. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I'm getting a job. I've already started applying places. I'm finding an apartment I can afford on my own. I'm building a life that belongs to me instead of living in someone else's beautiful prison. Daniel felt a surge of pride mixed with something more complicated. That takes a lot of courage. You gave me that courage by showing me what integrity looks like, by choosing your daughter over what you might have wanted, by being the kind of man who doesn't take advantage of someone who's drowning. Lila's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I called you here today to tell you that, to thank you for being decent when it would have been so easy not to be. You don't need to thank me for that. Yes, I do, because you saved me, Daniel. Not in the way I thought I needed to be saved when I met Marcus. You saved me by refusing to save me, by making me realize I had to save myself. They stood in silence for a long moment. A bird called somewhere in the garden. The pool filter hummed steadily, just like it always had. I should let you work, Lila said finally. I just wanted you to know what you meant to me, what you still mean to me. Lila, wait! Daniel surprised himself by walking around the pool toward her. He stopped a respectful distance away, but close enough to see the hope and fear warring in her expression. Can I ask you something? Anything? That day in June, when you touched my face, what would have happened if I'd kissed you? She considered the question carefully. Honestly, I think we would have destroyed each other. We would have started something neither of us could control, and it would have ended with you losing your job, me losing what little stability I have, and both of us hating ourselves for being selfish. We would have hurt everyone around us, Emma, Marcus, ourselves, for something that probably wouldn't have lasted anyway. But part of you wanted me to. Part of me wanted you to, she admitted. Part of me still does. But the bigger part, the part that's starting to heal, knows you made the right choice. We both did. Daniel nodded slowly. I thought about you these past 6 weeks. Wondered if you were okay. I thought about you too. About Emma. About the life you've built for her. About what it means to be that kind of parent, that kind of person. She smiled, sad and genuine. You're a good man, Daniel Brooks. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. You're stronger than you think, he replied, and worth more than how Marcus treats you. I hope you find someone who sees that. Maybe someday. Right now I'm just trying to learn how to see it myself. Lila turned to go, then paused and looked back at him. Will you do something for me? If I can. Tell Emma she's lucky. Tell her she has a father who knows what matters, who makes the hard choices, who shows up every single day and does the right thing even when it costs him. Tell her that matters more than anything else in the world. I'll tell her, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you, Lila. Thank you, Daniel. She walked away then, back into the house, and Daniel was alone with the pool and the weight of everything that had been said and unsaid between them. He worked carefully that morning, testing the water chemistry with extra precision, making sure every leaf was skimmed, every surface brushed clean. When he finished and packed up his equipment, he looked back at the house one more time. Lila was standing at one of the upper windows, watching him. He raised his hand in a small wave. She waved back. Then he got in his truck and drove away from 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, not knowing if he'd ever see her again. The rest of June passed quietly. Daniel serviced the Hart residence every Tuesday, but Lila was never outside. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses of her through the windows, reading in the study, talking on the phone, moving through the house like a ghost. She never came out to talk to him, and he didn't try to initiate contact. They'd said what needed to be said. Early July brought a heat wave that made the pool's work harder and Daniel's job more demanding. He added afternoon appointments to his schedule to keep up with the increased chemical consumption, which meant less time with Emma, but more money in the bank. She was excited about summer camp starting in August, needed new sneakers because she'd grown 2 sizes, wanted swimming lessons because all her friends were taking them. Life went on, normal and necessary and demanding his full attention. The third Tuesday in July, Daniel arrived at the Hart residence to find a moving truck in the driveway. His heart rate spiked immediately. He parked on the street and approached cautiously, not sure if he should be there at all. A crew of movers was loading furniture into the truck, expensive-looking pieces that probably cost more than Daniel made in a year. He recognized the patio furniture from the pool area, the table where Lila used to sit with her books and her iced tea. "Excuse me," he called to one of the movers. "Is Mr. Hart home?" "Nah, man, just the lady. She's supervising inside." Daniel hesitated, knowing he should leave, knowing this wasn't his business. But something pulled him forward, around the moving truck, toward the open front door. He found Lila in the living room, clipboard in hand, checking items off a list as the movers carried them past. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked more alive than he'd ever seen her. When she noticed him standing in the doorway, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Daniel, I was hoping you'd come by today. I didn't know you were moving. I would have, I don't know, called, something." She walked over to him, and he could see the mix of exhaustion and exhilaration in her eyes. "It happened faster than I expected. Marcus and I had a conversation last week. I told him I was leaving, and instead of fighting it, he just agreed. Said if I wanted out, he wasn't going to force me to stay. Very civilized, very cold, very Marcus." "Are you okay?" "I'm terrified," she admitted with a laugh. "I'm moving into a one-bedroom apartment in Glendale that probably costs more than it should and is definitely smaller than I'm used to. I start a new job Monday as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit. Half the salary I used to make, no benefits for the first 3 months, but it's mine. I earned it. Nobody handed it to me." "That's incredible, Lila. Really. It's something." She glanced at the movers working around them. "Can we talk outside just for a minute?" They walked to the pool together, their feet following a path they'd walked dozens of times before. The water was perfectly clear, the chemical balance exactly right. Daniel had made sure of that, the same way he always did. "I wanted to tell you in person," Lila said once they were alone, "to thank you one more time and to ask you something. Ask me anything. Do you think people can change, really change, not just temporarily adjust, but fundamentally become different than they were?" Daniel thought about Emma's mother, who'd claimed she was changing every time she called in those early months, before she stopped calling entirely. He thought about his own father, who'd promised to stop drinking a dozen times before dying of liver failure when Daniel was 20. He thought about all the ways people tried to reinvent themselves and usually failed. But he also thought about Lila, the ghost he'd met 6 months ago compared to the woman standing in front of him now. He thought about his own journey from angry, abandoned 26-year-old to the father Emma deserved. "I think people can change if they have a reason to," he said finally, "and if they're willing to do the work even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's what I thought too." She smiled at him, and there was something in it that made his chest ache, fondness, gratitude, and underneath it all a hint of the connection they'd both chosen not to pursue. "Thank you for being my reason, even if you didn't mean to be. You did the work yourself. I just showed up on Tuesdays. You showed up and you saw me. That was everything." One of the movers called from the house, asking Lila about which boxes went to storage. She held up a finger, 1 minute, then turned back to Daniel. "I should go. They're on a schedule and I'm running out of time." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "Can I hug you? Just once, just to say goodbye properly?" Daniel knew it was a bad idea, knew that physical contact would make this harder than it already was, but he also knew that sometimes saying goodbye properly mattered more than protecting yourself from pain. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, you can." Lila stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Daniel hugged her back, careful and respectful, but genuine. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, and for just a moment he let himself feel what it might have been like if their lives had been different. If they'd met in another time, another place, without all the complications that made anything between them impossible. Then she pulled back, wiping her eyes quickly. "Take care of yourself, Daniel Brooks, and take care of Emma. She's a lucky girl. Take care of yourself too. And Lila, for what it's worth, whoever you become in this next chapter, whoever you figure out you are when you're not trying to be what someone else needs, that person is going to be amazing." She smiled through her tears. "I hope you're right." "I am. Trust me." Lila walked back toward the house, stopping once to look back at him. "Will you still service the pool, even if I'm not here?" "If Mr. Hart wants me to." "He does. I asked him specifically. Said you were the best we'd had and he shouldn't change that just because I was leaving." She grinned suddenly. I might have also mentioned you were very professional and he had nothing to worry about, just in case he was wondering. Was he wondering? Honestly? I don't think Marcus wondered much of anything. That's kind of the problem. She shrugged. But now you know you're not losing the account. That's something, at least. That's something, Daniel agreed. He watched her disappear into the house, then stood by the pool for a few more minutes, memorizing the space and what it had meant to him. This patio where they'd had conversations that changed both their lives. This water he'd kept perfectly balanced, even while everything around it shifted and threatened to fall apart. Finally, he walked back to his truck, got behind the wheel, and drove away from 2847 Meadowbrook Lane for what felt like the last time, even though he knew he'd be back the following Tuesday. Because that was the thing about life. It kept going forward whether you were ready or not. Jobs still needed doing, kids still needed raising, pools still needed cleaning. You didn't get to pause and process and feel everything you needed to feel. You just kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept making the right choices, even when the wrong ones would feel so much easier. That night, Daniel sat with Emma on their worn couch, reading her favorite book for probably the 100th time. She nestled against him, her small hand resting on his arm, completely trusting and completely loved. "Daddy?" she said when he finished the story. "Yeah, sweetheart? I'm glad you're my dad." The simplicity of it hit him harder than he expected. "I'm glad I'm your dad, too. Best job I'll ever have. Better than cleaning pools?" "Way better than cleaning pools." She giggled, pleased with herself for making him smile. "Tell me another story. A real one. About you." "What kind of real story?" "About a time you had to choose between something you wanted and something you needed. Like in the book." Daniel thought about it, about Lila and Marcus Hart and that perfect pool and all the complicated feelings that had nothing to do with Emma and everything to do with the particular loneliness of being an adult. "Once," he said carefully, "I met someone who needed a friend. And I wanted to be that friend because they were kind and interesting and made me feel less alone. But being their friend would have made things complicated in ways that might have hurt other people. So I had to choose between what I wanted and what was right." "What did you choose?" "What was right." "Was it hard?" "Very hard." Emma processed this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "But you're glad you chose right, aren't you?" "Yes," Daniel said, and meant it completely. "I'm very glad." "Me too." She yawned, already half asleep against his shoulder. "Because if you chose wrong, you might not be here with me right now." Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds came the exact truth Daniel needed to hear. He kissed the top of her head and held her close, grateful beyond words for the small person who made every hard choice worth it. Summer settled into its rhythm after that, each day blending into the next with the kind of comfortable monotony Daniel had once craved. Emma started her camp program, coming home each afternoon with stories about swimming lessons and craft projects and new friends whose names changed daily. Daniel kept his schedule packed, servicing pools across Riverside Heights, while the heat turned relentless and the work became almost meditative in its repetition. He returned to 2847 Meadowbrook Lane every Tuesday, just like he'd promised. The house felt different now, emptier somehow, even though Marcus Hart still lived there and presumably still entertained clients by that perfect infinity pool. Daniel never saw him. The gate code worked, the payment processed automatically, and the pool needed the same careful maintenance it always had. But the patio furniture was different now, generic pieces that had none of Lila's presence in them. No books left on side tables, no iced tea waiting in the shade, just stone and water and silence. Daniel told himself he didn't miss her, told himself that what they'd shared had been temporary and necessary, and exactly what it needed to be, a catalyst for change that had pushed them both toward better versions of their lives. He believed that mostly. But sometimes, when he was testing the water chemistry or skimming leaves from the surface, he'd catch himself looking toward the house, half expecting to see her standing at the window or walking across the patio with that quiet smile that had made him feel seen in ways he'd forgotten were possible. She never was. 3 weeks after Lila moved out, Daniel arrived on a Tuesday to find a silver Mercedes parked in the driveway. He recognized it immediately. Marcus Hart's car, the one he'd seen exactly twice before in all his months servicing the property. His stomach tightened with unease. Marcus had never been home during Daniel's scheduled maintenance, and the sudden deviation from pattern felt deliberate. Daniel gathered his equipment and walked to the pool area, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. He was setting up his testing kit when he heard footsteps behind him. "Daniel, isn't it?" He turned to find Marcus Hart standing at the edge of the patio, dressed in expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Up close, Marcus was exactly what Daniel had expected. Handsome in that polished, maintained way that came from personal trainers and tailored clothes and never having worried about money. His silver hair was carefully styled, his posture confident and relaxed, but his eyes were calculating, taking Daniel's measure with the kind of cold assessment that made it clear this wasn't a social visit. "Mr. Hart," Daniel said, keeping his voice neutral and professional. "I didn't expect to see you here during my scheduled time. I rearranged my morning specifically to speak with you." Marcus walked closer, stopping on the opposite side of the pool. The water rippled between them, reflecting the cloudless sky. "I wanted to talk to you about Lila." Every muscle in Daniel's body tensed. "I'm not sure that's appropriate." "She left me," Marcus continued, as if Daniel hadn't spoken. "Moved out in July, filed for separation last week. I'm sure you know that already, since you were here the day she moved. I was here to service the pool, same as always." "Of course you were." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just doing your job. Very professional, very conscientious. That's what Lila always said about you, how professional you were." Daniel said nothing, waiting for Marcus to get to whatever point he was circling. "The thing is," Marcus said, his tone still conversational, but with steel underneath, "Lila changed. Over the course of this year, she went from compliant and understanding to demanding and difficult. Started going to therapy, setting boundaries, talking about needing space and independence. Do you know when that shift started?" "I wouldn't know anything about your personal relationship." "It started in April, right around the time you began servicing our pool." Marcus let that hang in the air for a moment. "Interesting timing, don't you think?" "Mr. Hart, if you're implying something, I'd appreciate you being direct." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. Lila met you, and suddenly she decided our life together wasn't enough. She started questioning everything, our relationship, our plans, her place in my world. And when I asked her what changed, do you know what she said?" Daniel's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "No, sir. She said someone had shown her what it looked like to choose integrity over convenience. To put someone else's needs ahead of your own wants. To be the kind of person who does the right thing even when it costs you." Marcus's eyes were hard now, all pretense of civility gone. "She was talking about you, wasn't she? She was going through a difficult time. I listened when she needed someone to talk to. That's all." "That's all?" Marcus repeated, his tone making it clear he didn't believe that for a second. "You just happened to be a friendly ear. A working-class hero who made her feel special and seen and all the things I apparently failed to provide. And you expect me to believe nothing happened between you?" "Nothing happened," Daniel said firmly, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. "I maintained appropriate boundaries at all times. Your fiancé, your ex-fiancé, was lonely and struggling. I treated her with basic human decency. If that made her realize she deserved better treatment in her personal life, that's not my fault." The words came out harder than Daniel intended, and he saw Marcus's expression shift from calculated calm to genuine anger. "You have a lot of nerve," Marcus said quietly, "standing in my home on property I pay you to maintain, and telling me I didn't treat Lila well enough." "I didn't say that." "You implied it. And you know what's interesting? You're probably right. I didn't give Lila what she needed. I gave her security, comfort, a beautiful home, financial stability, but I didn't give her attention. I didn't make her feel valued as a person, rather than as an accessory to my life." Marcus walked around the pool, closing the distance between them. "But here's what you need to understand. Lila and I had an arrangement. She knew what our relationship was when we started. She agreed to those terms. And then you came along and made her want something different. People are allowed to change their minds about what they want from life. Not when it costs me 3 years of investment and makes me look like a fool in front of my colleagues and clients." Marcus was close enough now that Daniel could see the barely controlled rage in his eyes. Do you have any idea what it's like to introduce your fiancée to business partners? Make plans based on the life you're building together, and then have her walk away because some pool cleaner made her feel understood? Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. I'm sorry your relationship didn't work out, but Lila made her own choices. I didn't manipulate her or pursue her, or do anything except treat her like she mattered. If that threatened your relationship, maybe the relationship had bigger problems. For a moment, Daniel thought Marcus might actually hit him. The older man's face flushed red, his shoulders tensed, and something dangerous flickered in his expression. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back and took a breath. You're fired, Marcus said coldly. Effective immediately. I'll be calling your company to request a different service provider. I don't want you on this property again. Daniel had expected this, but it still hit him like a punch to the gut. The heart account was one of his highest-paying jobs, and losing it would mean scrambling to fill the gap in his schedule and his income. But he kept his voice calm when he responded. That's your right, Mr. Hart. I'll pack up my equipment and leave. Before you go, I want you to understand something. Marcus moved closer again, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. Lila called me last week. She's struggling in that tiny apartment, working long hours at a nonprofit that barely pays minimum wage, trying to rebuild a life from nothing. She asked if I'd consider giving her another chance. Daniel's stomach dropped. What did you say? I told her I'd think about it, because the truth is, despite everything, I do care about her. And I can offer her things you never could: security, stability, a life that doesn't involve worrying about making rent or paying bills. She's realizing that now. Realizing that whatever fantasy you represented isn't sustainable in the real world. If you actually cared about her, you'd want her to be happy, not just safe. Spoken like someone who's never had to choose between the two. Marcus smiled, and there was something pitying in it that made Daniel's skin crawl. You're a good man, Daniel. I can see that. You work hard, you take care of your daughter, you try to do the right thing. But good men don't always win. Sometimes the world rewards people who understand that comfort and security matter more than noble gestures and emotional connection. Is that what you think Lila wants? To come back to someone who sees her as a business arrangement? I think Lila wants to stop struggling, and I can make that happen. Marcus pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at Daniel. I've just sent an email to your supervisor requesting a new service provider and explaining that your conduct made me uncomfortable. Nothing specific, nothing that would get you in serious trouble, but enough to raise questions about your professionalism. Daniel felt ice flood his veins. I didn't do anything wrong. You made my fiancé fall in love with you, or at least fall in love with the idea of you. That might not be technically wrong, but it sure as hell wasn't right. Marcus pocketed his phone. Now get your equipment and get off my property. And Daniel, stay away from Lila. She's trying to rebuild her life, and you're just a reminder of a mistake she can't afford to keep making. Daniel wanted to argue, to defend himself, to tell Marcus exactly what he thought of men who treated women like possessions, and then blamed other people when those women finally found the courage to leave. But he'd learned a long time ago that some battles couldn't be won with words, especially when the other person held all the power. So he gathered his equipment in silence, loaded it into his truck under Marcus Hart's watchful gaze, and drove away from 2847 Meadowbrook Lane, knowing he'd never come back. The conversation with his supervisor happened 2 hours later. Daniel sat in the cramped office of Crystal Clear Pool Services while Tom Richardson reviewed the email on his computer screen, his expression carefully neutral. Hart says you made him uncomfortable, Tom said finally, not looking at Daniel. Says there were inappropriate interactions with someone in the household that made him question your professionalism. Nothing inappropriate happened, Daniel said firmly. Mr. Hart's fiancée was going through a difficult time. I listened when she talked. That's it. I never crossed any lines. He's not saying you did anything specifically wrong, just that the situation made him uncomfortable. Tom finally looked up, and Daniel could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing one client's complaint against 7 years of reliable service. But here's the thing, Daniel. Hart is a high-value account. He pays top dollar, he refers other clients, and he's got connections throughout Riverside Heights. If he's uncomfortable, that's a problem for us. So you're taking his word over mine. I'm taking his money over your word. That's how this business works. Tom leaned back in his chair, sighing. Look, I'm not firing you. You're good at your job, and I don't have any real evidence that you did something wrong. But I am reassigning you off the premium routes. You'll take the standard service calls, the smaller properties, the weekly maintenance jobs that don't pay as much. Consider it a cooling off period. For how long? Until I'm confident this won't become a bigger problem. If Hart starts bad-mouthing you to other clients, if more complaints come in, then we'll have to revisit this conversation. Tom's expression softened slightly. I'm trying to protect you here, Daniel. Take the reassignment, keep your head down, and this will blow over eventually. Daniel knew he should be grateful. Tom could have fired him on the spot, could have sided completely with Marcus Hart, and left Daniel scrambling to find a new job with a black mark on his record. But gratitude felt impossible when he was being punished for doing nothing wrong except treating someone with basic human decency. Fine, Daniel said quietly. I'll take the reassignment. Good. I'll have the new route ready for you by next week. Tom hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I believe you. I know you're not the type to mess around with clients or their families, but belief doesn't pay the bills, and Hart's money talks louder than my faith in your character. Daniel left the office feeling hollowed out and angry. The reassignment meant less money, which meant he'd have to pick up extra jobs to make up the difference, which meant less time with Emma right when she was starting first grade and needed him most. All because Marcus Hart couldn't handle losing control of a woman who'd finally found the courage to walk away. He picked Emma up from camp that afternoon and took her for ice cream, needing the simple comfort of her presence. She chattered about her day, about the relay race she'd won and the friendship bracelet she was making, completely oblivious to the storm churning in her father's mind. You're quiet, Daddy, she said, chocolate ice cream smeared across her chin. Did something bad happen at work? Daniel wiped her face with a napkin, forcing a smile. Just some changes in my schedule. Nothing for you to worry about. Will you still be able to pick me up from school? Always. That's never going to change. She seemed satisfied with that answer, returning her attention to her ice cream. Daniel watched her, this small person who trusted him completely to keep her world stable and safe, and felt the weight of that responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. He'd made the right choices with Lila. He knew that, believed that. But right choices apparently still came with consequences. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat on his apartment balcony with a beer he wasn't really drinking and stared at the lights of the city spread out below him. His phone was on the table next to him, and he found himself thinking about Lila, wondering if what Marcus had said was true, if she really had called asking for another chance, wondering if she was struggling as much as Marcus claimed, if she regretted leaving, if she missed the security of that glass house even knowing the cost. He wanted to call her, wanted to hear her voice, to know if she was okay, to tell her about Marcus's threats and his reassignment and the whole mess their brief connection had created. But he didn't have her number, didn't know where she lived now, and reaching out would only prove Marcus right, that Daniel couldn't let go, that he was pursuing something that needed to stay in the past. So he sat with his untouched beer and his complicated feelings and told himself this was just another hard moment that would pass eventually, that he'd adjust to the new route, make up the lost income, keep providing for Emma, that Lila would figure out her life without needing him to be part of it, that sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting unfair consequences without fighting back. 2 weeks later, Daniel's new route was everything Tom had promised. Smaller properties, lower pay, clients who nickel and dimed over chemical costs and complained about service fees. The work was the same, but the respect was different. These clients saw him as the help, someone to be managed and directed rather than trusted to do his job. It wore on him in ways the physical labor never had. He was finishing up at a small house in a middle-class neighborhood, a family with 3 kids who left the pool area trashed every single week when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Daniel Brooks? The voice was feminine, professional, unfamiliar. Speaking. My name is Rachel Chen. I'm a friend of Lila Hart's. Well, Lila Brennan now. She's gone back to her maiden name. Daniel's heart rate spiked. Is she okay? She's fine, but she asked me to call you because she didn't have your number and wasn't sure how else to reach you. She'd like to meet with you if you're willing. She said it's important. Every instinct Daniel had screamed at him to say no. Meeting with Lila would only complicate things further, give Marcus more ammunition if he found out, potentially cost Daniel what little job security he had left. But underneath all that rational thinking was a pull he couldn't ignore. The need to know she was all right, to hear whatever she thought was important enough to track him down. "When and where?" he asked. "Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. There's a coffee shop called The Grind on 4th Street downtown. Do you know it?" "I can find it." "Lila will be there." "And Daniel?" "She asked me to tell you, this isn't about getting back together or crossing lines. She just needs to talk to you about something, and she didn't want you to worry." "Okay," Daniel said, though worry was exactly what he felt. "I'll be there." Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Daniel dropped Emma at a birthday party for one of her camp friends, grateful for the timing that meant he wouldn't have to explain where he was going. He drove to 4th Street with his stomach in knots, parked 3 blocks away because he couldn't find anything closer, and walked to the Grind feeling like he was heading towards something that might change everything again. The coffee shop was small and crowded, full of people on laptops and couples on dates and students studying in corners. Daniel scanned the room and found Lila sitting at a table near the back window, her hands wrapped around a paper cup, her eyes on the door like she'd been watching for him. She looked different. Thinner, definitely, but there was something else, a kind of strength in her posture that hadn't been there before. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair shorter than it had been in July, and when she saw Daniel, her face lit up with a smile that was equal parts relief and nervousness. Daniel wove through the tables to reach her, and when he got close, Lila stood and hugged him quickly before he could decide if he should offer a handshake or keep his distance. She smelled like coffee and vanilla, and something that made his chest ache with recognition. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping back and gesturing to the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. Your friend made it sound important." Daniel sat down, studying her face. "Are you okay?" "Marcus said some things that made me think you were struggling." Lila's expression hardened. "You talked to Marcus?" "He ambushed me at the house, told me you'd called asking for another chance, that you were struggling and regretting your choice to leave." "That son of a—" Lila stopped herself, took a breath. "I did not call Marcus asking for another chance. I called him about the prenup, trying to negotiate for a small settlement that would help me get on my feet. He tried to use that as leverage to get me back, and when I refused, he told me I'd never make it on my own. I should have known he'd weaponize that conversation." Relief flooded through Daniel. "So you're not going back to him?" "Never. Not even if I end up homeless." She wrapped her hands tighter around her cup. "But I need you to know what happened after I left. What Marcus did. He got me reassigned off the premium route, said I made him uncomfortable, implied there was inappropriate conduct without saying anything specific enough to get me in real trouble." "I know, and I'm so sorry, Daniel. That's why I needed to see you." Lila leaned forward, her expression intense. "Marcus called my new employer, told them I had an inappropriate relationship with service staff while living with him, that I had questionable judgment and ethics. He didn't give them details, just planted seeds of doubt. My boss called me in for a meeting to discuss concerning information about my character." Daniel felt cold rage spreading through his chest. "Did you lose your job?" "No. I told them the truth, that I'd become friends with someone who worked at Marcus's house, that there was never anything inappropriate, and that my ex-fiancé was retaliating because I left him. They believed me, or at least they said they did, but now I'm under scrutiny, getting assigned the least important projects, being watched for any sign that Marcus's implications were true. That's illegal. That's defamation. It's careful. Marcus is too smart to say anything actionable. He just suggests, implies, plants doubt. And because he's well-connected and I'm nobody, people listen to him." Lila's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I wanted to warn you. If he's willing to sabotage my career, he'll do the same to you. You need to be prepared for that." "I can handle Marcus Hart." "Can you?" "Because he's already cost you income, and if he keeps pushing, he could cost you your entire job. You have Emma to think about. You can't afford to have your reputation destroyed because you were kind to me." Daniel reached across the table and took Lila's hand before he could think better of it. "Listen to me. What's happening isn't your fault. Marcus is a petty, controlling man who can't handle losing. That's on him, not you. You didn't do anything wrong by leaving, and I didn't do anything wrong by treating you like a person. But we're both paying for it anyway." Lila turned her hand over, gripping his tightly. "That's not fair." "Life isn't fair. I learned that a long time ago." Daniel squeezed her hand once, then released it, aware of the people around them even though none of them were paying attention. But we're both still standing. We're both making it work. That has to count for something. I think about you, Lila said quietly. About that morning in June when you could have kissed me and didn't, when you chose doing the right thing over what you wanted. That moment changed my life, Daniel. It showed me what integrity actually looks like. You gave yourself that change. I was just there. You were more than that. You were the first person in years who saw me as someone worth listening to rather than just looking at. Do you know how rare that is? Daniel thought about his own loneliness, the years of being invisible to everyone except Emma, the way Lila had made him feel seen in return. Yeah, he said softly. I know exactly how rare that is. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the coffee shop fading into background static. Lila looked at him with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Fondness mixed with sadness, mixed with something that might have been longing. I wanted to ask you something, she said finally, and you can say no. You should probably say no, but I'm going to ask anyway. Okay? Can we be friends? Real friends, not just two people who crossed paths briefly and then went their separate ways. Can we have coffee sometimes? Talk about our lives? Be there for each other in actual meaningful ways? She rushed on before he could answer. I know it's complicated. I know Marcus is going to make things difficult if he finds out. I know you have Emma to protect and a job to keep and a million good reasons to walk away and never look back. But I'm asking anyway because you're the best person I know and I don't want to lose that connection. Daniel wanted to say yes more than he'd wanted almost anything in years, but wanting something didn't make it right or safe or possible. Lila, if Marcus finds out we're meeting, he'll use it against both of us. He'll tell people we were having an affair all along, that everything he implied was true. Your reputation, my job, everything we've worked to protect, it all becomes ammunition for him. I know. That's why I'm asking if you're willing to take that risk with me. She met his eyes directly. Not for anything romantic or inappropriate, just for friendship. For someone who understands what it's like to try to do the right thing in a world that punishes you for it. Daniel thought about Emma, about his responsibility to keep his job and provide stability. He thought about Marcus Hart's threats and the damage that had already been done. He thought about all the rational reasons to say no, to walk away, to keep himself and his daughter safe from the fallout of someone else's vindictiveness. Then he thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of example he wanted to set for Emma, someone who chose integrity over fear, someone who valued genuine connection over safety, someone who didn't let bullies dictate who he could care about. Yeah, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Yeah, we can be friends. Real ones. Lila's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of hope. Really? Really? But we do this carefully. We don't broadcast it. We're mindful of how things look, and if it starts causing problems for either of us, we reevaluate. Deal. Deal. She held out her hand across the table. Daniel shook it, sealing a promise that felt both terrifying and exactly right. They spent the next 2 hours talking, really talking, in ways they'd never quite managed on those Tuesday mornings by the pool. Lila told him about her tiny apartment with the leaking faucet and the neighbors who fought at 2 a.m. Daniel told her about Emma's first-grade anxieties and his struggles adjusting to the new route. They talked about Marcus's threats and how to protect themselves, about therapy and healing, and learning who you are when you're not performing for someone else's expectations. When it was time to leave, they made plans to meet again the following Saturday, same time, same place. Standing on the sidewalk outside the grind, Lila hugged Daniel goodbye, and this time he let himself hold her properly, briefly, before stepping back into safe distance. Thank you, she said. For what? For not walking away. For choosing friendship even when it's risky. For being exactly who I needed you to be. Same to you, Daniel replied. He watched her walk to her car, a beat-up Honda that was a far cry from the luxury she'd left behind, and felt something settle in his chest. This wouldn't be easy. Marcus would find out eventually, and there would be consequences. But for the first time in months, Daniel felt like he was moving towards something instead of just surviving each day. Some friendships were worth fighting for. Some connections mattered more than safety. and some lines, once you decided to cross them carefully and with clear intention, led exactly where you needed to go. Their friendship developed slowly over the following weeks, built on Saturday afternoon coffee meetings and occasional text messages that were carefully worded to reveal nothing if anyone ever saw them. They talked about everything except the attraction that still hummed beneath their conversations like a current neither of them acknowledged out loud. Daniel told Lila about Emma's struggles with reading comprehension and her triumph at finally mastering her times tables. Lila shared stories about her coworkers and the small victories of paying her own bills and learning to cook meals for one. It felt safe, this friendship, bounded by public coffee shops and daylight hours and the unspoken agreement that they would never let it become more than what it was. But safety, Daniel was learning, was sometimes just another word for pretending. The third Saturday in September, Lila showed up to the grind looking shaken. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee cup, and she kept glancing toward the door like she expected someone to walk through it. "What happened?" Daniel asked, leaning across the table. "Marcus knows. About us meeting." She took a shaky breath. "He had someone following me. A private investigator, I think. He sent me photos this morning, us sitting here, walking to our cars, hugging goodbye last week. He didn't say anything specific in the text, just sent the pictures with a message that said, 'I see you've been busy.'" Daniel felt his blood run cold. "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but the implication was clear. He's watching, and he can make things difficult whenever he chooses." Lila pulled out her phone and showed Daniel the images. They were taken from a distance, but clearly showed the two of them together, and in the context Marcus could create, they'd look like exactly what he wanted people to think they were. "We should stop meeting," Daniel said, hating the words even as he spoke them. "This is exactly what I was worried about. He's building a case against us." "A case for what? We're not doing anything wrong. We're two adults having coffee and talking. That's not illegal or immoral or inappropriate. It doesn't matter what we're actually doing. It matters what it looks like. And Marcus knows how to make it look however he wants." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, frustration and anger warring in his chest. "He could show these to my supervisor, to your boss, to anyone who'd be willing to believe his narrative. We'd both be destroyed." "So we let him win? We let him control who we're allowed to be friends with because he's vindictive and powerful?" Lila's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. She lowered it again, but the intensity remained. "I spent 3 years letting Marcus control my life. I'm not giving him that power anymore. This isn't about him controlling you. It's about protecting ourselves from his retaliation. It's the same thing, Daniel. Don't you see? If we stop meeting because he's watching, he still wins. He still gets to dictate our choices through fear." Daniel wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words. Because Lila was right, and he knew it. Giving in to Marcus's intimidation tactics was just another form of surrender, another way of letting someone else's cruelty define the boundaries of their lives. "So what do?" he asked finally. "We keep meeting, but we're smarter about it." Lila leaned forward, her expression fierce. "We vary our locations, we're aware of our surroundings. We don't do anything that could be misconstrued as romantic. We're just friends having coffee, and if Marcus wants to waste money having us followed, that's his problem. And when he uses those photos anyway, when he shows them to people and tells them whatever story serves him best, then we tell the truth. We say we're friends, nothing more, and we dare anyone to prove otherwise." She reached across the table and took Daniel's hand, a gesture that was becoming familiar and dangerous in equal measure. "I'm not running from him anymore. I'm not letting him make me feel ashamed of choosing my own life. And I'm not losing you because he can't handle the fact that I don't belong to him." Daniel looked at their joined hands, at the determination in Lila's eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. This woman who'd been so fragile and lost just months ago had found a core of steel, and watching her stand up to her fear was both inspiring and terrifying. "Okay," he said quietly, "we keep meeting. But Lila, if this starts to hurt Emma in any way, if there's even a hint that my relationship with you is affecting my ability to provide for her, I'll have to walk away. You need to understand that." "I do. And I'd never ask you to choose me over her. That's not what this is about." "What is it about?" Lila smiled, sad and knowing. "It's about refusing to let someone else's ugliness make us uglier. It's about being brave enough to care about people even when it's risky. It's about proving that good people can still exist in the world without being punished for it. She released his hand and sat back, and Daniel felt the loss of that contact like a physical ache. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, and when they left the shop together, they were both hyper-aware of their surroundings, scanning for anyone who might be watching, anyone who might be documenting their entirely innocent interaction for purposes that were anything but. The following week, Marcus made his move. Daniel was working at a property in his new route, a modest house with a small pool that needed significant chemical rebalancing, when Tom called. "We need to talk," his supervisor said without preamble. "Can you come to the office when you're done there?" "What's this about?" "Just come in. We'll discuss it when you get here." The line went dead. Daniel stared at his phone, dread settling heavy in his stomach. He finished his work on autopilot, packed up his equipment, and drove to Crystal Clear's office with his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Tom was waiting in his office with another man Daniel didn't recognize. Older, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer presence that made it clear this wasn't a casual conversation. "Daniel, this is Robert Chen. He's representing a former client of ours who's filed a formal complaint about your conduct." Tom's expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Mr. Hart alleges that you engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a member of his household while employed to service his property." "That's not true," Daniel said immediately. "I've never engaged in any inappropriate relationship." "Let me finish," Tom interrupted. "Mr. Hart is alleging that you pursued a romantic relationship with his then-fiancée, that this relationship was the cause of their separation, and that you've continued to see this woman despite being asked to cease contact. He has photographic evidence of you meeting with her on multiple occasions after your employment at his property was terminated." Robert Chen opened a folder and slid several photographs across the desk. They were the same images Lila had shown Daniel, proof of coffee dates and conversations, and entirely platonic interactions that could be spun into whatever narrative Marcus wanted to create. "These photos show me having coffee with a friend," Daniel said, keeping his voice level. "There's nothing inappropriate or romantic about any of these meetings." "That may be," Chen replied smoothly, "but appearances matter in this industry. My client's concern is that you formed an emotional attachment to someone in his household while employed there, that this attachment influenced your professional conduct, and that you've continued to pursue this attachment despite the impact it's had on my client's personal life. Your client's fiancée left him because he treated her like a possession instead of a person. That had nothing to do with me. That's your version. Mr. Hart's version is different, and given his standing in the community and the weight of his connections, his version carries significant influence." Chen pulled out another document. "Mr. Hart is prepared to file complaints with the Better Business Bureau, to contact other premium clients in Riverside Heights about concerns regarding your professionalism, and to pursue civil action for intentional interference with his domestic relationship. Unless, of course, you're willing to agree to certain terms." "What terms?" Tom asked, speaking for the first time since the photos were revealed. "Mr. Brooks ceases all contact with the woman in question. No meetings, no phone calls, no text messages, no interaction of any kind. In exchange, Mr. Hart will drop his complaints and take no further action that might damage Mr. Brooks's reputation or employment." Daniel felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. "You're asking me to stop being friends with someone because your client can't handle the fact that she doesn't want him anymore. I'm asking you to make a choice between a friendship and your livelihood." Chen's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing something as simple as a scheduling conflict. "Mr. Hart has the resources and the connections to make your life very difficult. He can't force you to stop seeing this woman, but he can make it costly enough that you'll wish you had. This is extortion. This is a settlement negotiation," Chen corrected. "And it's a generous one. You walk away from a situation that's already cost you professionally, and in exchange you keep your job and your reputation intact. That seems like a reasonable trade." Daniel looked at Tom, searching for support or outrage or some indication that his supervisor saw how wrong this was. Tom's expression remained carefully neutral, the look of a man who'd already calculated the cost-benefit analysis and come to a conclusion Daniel wouldn't like. "What does the company think about this?" Daniel asked. "The company thinks you should consider the offer," Tom said quietly. "We can't afford the kind of negative publicity Hart could generate. And while I believe you when you say nothing inappropriate happened, belief doesn't protect us from a well-connected client who wants to cause problems. So you're asking me to choose my job over my personal life. I'm asking you to be pragmatic. This woman, she's not worth losing everything you've built. Her name is Lila, Daniel said sharply, and she's worth exactly as much as any other human being who deserves to have friends and make her own choices about who she spends time with. That's very noble, Chen interjected, but nobility doesn't pay your bills or provide for your daughter. Think about what you're risking here. Emma. They were using Emma as leverage even without saying her name directly. Daniel felt sick with the realization that Marcus had found the perfect pressure point, the one thing Daniel couldn't afford to risk, the one person who mattered more than any principle or friendship or sense of justice. I need time to think about this, Daniel said finally. You have 24 hours, Chen replied, standing and buttoning his suit jacket. After that, Mr. Hart proceeds with filing formal complaints and taking whatever additional action he deems necessary. Choose wisely, Mr. Brooks. He left, taking his folder of photographs and his barely veiled threats with him. Tom stayed behind, looking uncomfortable for the first time since the conversation began. I'm sorry, Daniel. I really am. But you need to understand the position the company is in. I understand perfectly. You're choosing money over what's right, same as everyone else. That's not fair, isn't it? Daniel stood, unable to sit still under the weight of his anger and helplessness. A powerful man is bullying two people because he can't handle losing, and instead of standing up to him, everyone just falls in line. That's exactly what's happening here. Sometimes you have to choose your battles. This isn't one you can win. Maybe not, but that doesn't make surrendering to it any less wrong. Daniel left before Tom could respond, driving aimlessly through the city while his mind raced through impossible calculations. He could fight this, could refuse Marcus's terms, could dare him to follow through on his threats, could stand on principle and integrity and the belief that good people shouldn't have to hide their friendships. But fighting meant risking everything, his job, his income, his ability to provide Emma with the stable life she deserved. And for what? For coffee dates with someone he could never be with anyway? For a friendship that, no matter how genuine, couldn't justify the potential cost? He called Lila from a parking lot, unable to face this decision alone. Marcus made his move, he said when she answered. His lawyer just threatened to destroy my reputation and my job unless I agree to stop seeing you. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long Daniel thought she might have hung up. Then he heard her take a shaky breath. You should agree to his terms, she said quietly. What? You should do what he's asking. Stop meeting me, cut contact, protect your job and your daughter. This isn't worth what it's costing you. Lila, I'm not going to let Marcus dictate. Yes, you are. Because Emma needs you employed and stable, and I'm not worth risking that. Her voice cracked slightly. I've been selfish, asking you to keep meeting me, pretending this friendship was sustainable when Marcus was always going to escalate. I should have known better. I should have protected you by walking away weeks ago. Don't do this. Don't let him win by making his threats for him. This isn't about winning or losing anymore. It's about you having a life and a daughter to protect, and me being realistic about what I can afford to cost you. Lila took another breath, and Daniel could hear tears in it. I care about you too much to let you sacrifice everything for a friendship that was probably doomed from the start. It's not doomed. It is. We both knew it was. We were just too stubborn to admit it. She laughed, broken and bitter. Marcus was right about one thing. The real world doesn't reward people for choosing connection over security. It punishes them. And I won't be the reason you get punished. Lila, please, tell Emma she's lucky to have you. Tell her to never settle for anyone who doesn't fight for her the way you fight for her. And Daniel, thank you for everything. For seeing me, for being my friend, for showing me what integrity looks like even when I'm asking you to compromise it. Wait. The line went dead. Daniel tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again, same result. She turned off her phone or blocked his number, removing the choice from his hands by making it for him. He sat in his truck with his phone in his hand and felt something break inside him. Not his heart exactly. That implied romance, and what he felt for Lila was more complicated than simple love. It was recognition, connection, The particular ache of finding someone who understood you and having to let them go anyway. It was the exhaustion of trying to do the right thing in a world that punished you for it. It was the hollow victory of protecting what mattered most by sacrificing what mattered deeply. That night, Emma asked why he seemed sad. "Just tired, sweetheart," Daniel said, helping her with her homework at the kitchen table. "Is it because of the lady?" Daniel's head snapped up. "What lady?" "The one you have coffee with on Saturdays. I heard you talking to her on the phone." Emma's expression was serious, too knowing for a 6-year-old. "She made you happy. Now she makes you sad. Did she go away like Mommy?" Daniel pulled Emma into his lap, holding her tightly while he figured out how to explain something he barely understood himself. "She didn't go away like your mom did. She's still around, we're just not going to see each other anymore. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices about their friendships." "Because of me?" "No, baby, never because of you. Because of complicated adult things that have nothing to do with how special you are." "But you're sad." "Yeah, I'm sad. But I'll be okay. And you know what makes it better? Having you here, asking me questions, and being exactly who you are. You make everything better, Emma. Always." She hugged him tighter, her small arms barely reaching around his chest. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything." The next morning, Daniel called Robert Chen and agreed to Marcus's terms. No contact with Lila Brennan. No meetings, no calls, no texts. A clean break in exchange for dropping the complaints and leaving Daniel's reputation intact. "You've made a wise choice," Chen said, and Daniel wanted to reach through the phone and strangle him for the condescension in his tone. He hung up and sat in his truck outside Emma's school, watching parents drop off their kids for another normal day of learning and playing and growing up without having to know about the ugliness adults created for each other. Emma waved to him from the entrance, her backpack too big for her small frame, her smile bright and uncomplicated. Daniel waved back and forced himself to smile like his world hadn't just gotten smaller and dimmer. That weekend, he didn't go to the grind. He stayed home with Emma, took her to the park, made her favorite dinner, read her stories before bed. The routine was comforting and suffocating in equal measure. This was his life, these small, precious moments with his daughter. This was what he'd chosen to protect, what he'd sacrificed his friendship with Lila to preserve. It should have felt like victory. It felt like loss. 3 weeks passed. Daniel worked his route, came home to Emma, maintained the careful balance of his constrained but stable life. He didn't try to contact Lila, and she didn't reach out to him. Marcus's lawyer confirmed that all complaints had been dropped, and Tom gradually warmed back to his usual level of professional friendliness. Everything went back to normal. The kind of normal where you've survived something difficult and come out the other side diminished but intact. Then, on a Wednesday evening in late October, Daniel's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize but somehow knew he should answer. It was Rachel Chen, Lila's friend. "I'm calling because Lila asked me to check on you," Rachel said carefully. She wanted to make sure Marcus kept his word about dropping the complaints. "He did. Everything's fine." Daniel paused. "How is she?" "Struggling, missing you, angry at Marcus, and angry at the world, and angry at herself for putting you in that position." Rachel hesitated. "She wanted me to tell you something, but she wasn't sure if I should. I'm going to tell you anyway because I think you deserve to know." "Okay." "Marcus offered Lila money last week, a significant amount, enough to pay off her debts, get a better apartment, stop struggling financially. In exchange, she had to confirm his version of events about you two, had to sign a statement saying you'd pursued her inappropriately, that you'd been the cause of their breakup, all the things he'd been implying but couldn't prove." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What did she say?" "She told him to go to hell, said she'd rather work 3 jobs and live in her car than lie about you. Marcus threatened to sue her for violating the prenup, said he'd make sure she never got a decent job in this city. She still refused." Daniel felt something warm and painful expand in his chest. She didn't have to do that. She said she did. Said you'd chosen integrity over convenience and she owed you the same. Rachel's voice softened. "Lila wanted you to know that even though you can't be friends right now, even though Marcus won this round, she's still standing, and she's standing because you showed her how. Tell her—" Daniel stopped, not sure what message he could send that wouldn't violate the terms he'd agreed to or make things harder for both of them. Tell her thank you, and tell her she's stronger than she knows. I will. After Rachel hung up, Daniel sat with his phone in his hand and let himself feel everything he'd been pushing down for weeks. Pride in Lila's courage, rage at Marcus's vindictiveness, grief for the friendship they'd built and been forced to abandon. And underneath it all, a stubborn kernel of hope that someday, when Marcus's shadow didn't loom so large over both their lives, maybe they'd find a way back to each other. But for now, he had to let her go. Had to focus on Emma and work and the small, manageable pieces of life that didn't require fighting battles he couldn't win. Had to believe that choosing his daughter over everything else was the right decision, even when it felt like losing. Halloween came and went. Emma dressed as a scientist and collected enough candy to last until Christmas. Daniel carved pumpkins with her, took her trick-or-treating around their neighborhood, and tried to be present in the moments instead of lost in thoughts of what he'd given up. Thanksgiving brought Emma's questions about family and why they didn't have more of it, and Daniel explained again about her mother and his parents and the way sometimes your family was small but strong rather than big and complicated. The first week of December, Daniel was finishing up at a property when he noticed a car parked across the street. Nothing unusual about that, except the car had been there when he arrived an hour ago and the driver was still sitting behind the wheel. As Daniel packed up his equipment, the driver's door opened and Marcus Hart stepped out. Daniel's entire body tensed. He glanced around the quiet residential street, calculating distances and witnesses and exit strategies like he was preparing for combat instead of a conversation. Relax, Marcus said, walking closer but stopping a respectful distance away. I'm not here to threaten you or cause problems. I just want to talk. We have nothing to talk about. I disagree. I think we have quite a bit to talk about, actually. Marcus looked older than Daniel remembered, tired around the eyes despite his expensive clothes and maintained appearance. I've been thinking about something Lila said to me the last time we spoke. She said I treated people like assets instead of human beings, and that's why I'd end up alone no matter how much money I had. Sounds accurate. It is. Marcus smiled, but there was no humor in it. I spent 3 years with a woman I claimed to love, and I don't think I ever actually saw her. Not the way you did in a few months of Tuesday morning conversations. What do you want, Marcus? Because if this is some kind of mind game, it's not. It's an apology. Marcus took a breath, and for the first time, Daniel saw something genuine in his expression. I was cruel to you and to Lila. I used my power and my connections to punish you both for making me feel like I'd lost control. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Daniel stared at him, looking for the angle, the manipulation, the hidden threat. He found none of it, just a tired, lonely man who'd finally realized what he'd lost and why. Why are you telling me this? Because Lila deserves to have friends who care about her, and you deserve to not lose your livelihood over a friendship that never crossed any actual lines. Marcus pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out. This is a formal retraction of all complaints I filed or threatened to file. I've also sent letters to your employer and to Lila's employer, confirming that my previous concerns were baseless and that you both conducted yourselves with complete professionalism. You're free to see each other, talk to each other, be in each other's lives however you choose. Daniel took the envelope slowly, still waiting for the catch. What do you get out of this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Maybe that's the point. Marcus smiled again, sad and self-aware. Lila taught me something important when she walked away. She taught me that you can't buy people or control them into loving you. The harder you try to hold on, the faster they slip away. I should have learned that lesson with more grace. So you're just letting this go? Letting us be friends without consequences? I'm letting you both live your lives without me poisoning them. It's the least I can do after the damage I've caused. Marcus turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, Daniel, you were right about one thing. Lila deserved better than how I treated her, and if she found better in conversations with you, I can't be angry about that. I can only regret that I wasn't the kind of man who could give her what she actually needed. He walked back to his car and drove away, leaving Daniel standing on the sidewalk with an envelope full of freedom and no idea what to do with it. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel opened the envelope and read through the formal documents Marcus had prepared. They were exactly what he'd promised. Complete retractions, apologies to Daniel's employer, confirmations that no inappropriate conduct had occurred. Everything that had been hanging over Daniel's head for months, dissolved with a few pieces of paper and what seemed like genuine remorse. Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at Lila's number, which he'd never deleted despite agreeing not to use it. His thumb hovered over the call button while he argued with himself about what was right and what was safe and what he actually wanted. Finally, he typed out a text message. Marcus came to see me today. Said he's dropping everything, apologized for what he put us through. We're free to be friends again if you want to be. No pressure, no expectations. Just wanted you to know the door is open if you want to walk through it. He sent it before he could change his mind, then set his phone down and tried not to watch it for a response. It came 20 minutes later. Same coffee shop, Saturday at 2? Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks. I'll be there. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. Daniel dropped Emma at her friend's house for a playdate, fielding her curious questions about why he seemed happier than usual with vague answers about getting good news at work. The truth was far more complicated than he could explain to a 6-year-old, but Emma seemed satisfied enough with his smile to let it drop. The drive to the grind felt different this time. No looking over his shoulder for surveillance, no calculating the risk of being seen, just the anticipation of seeing someone who mattered to him, who understood parts of his life that nobody else could reach. When he walked through the coffee shop door, Lila was already there at their usual table by the window, and the smile that lit up her face when she saw him made everything they'd been through feel worthwhile. She stood as he approached, and this time when they hugged, there was no hesitation, no careful distance. Just genuine relief and affection and the comfort of two people who'd survived something difficult together. You look good, Daniel said, sitting across from her. Better than the last time I saw you. I feel better. The past few weeks have been hard, but they've also been clarifying. Lila pushed a coffee across the table toward him. I got you your usual. Hoped you'd still drink the same thing. Some things don't change. Daniel took a sip, the familiar taste grounding him in the moment. So, Marcus really just let this go? No conditions, no strings attached? Apparently losing someone you claim to love makes you reflect on your life choices. Who knew? Lila's smile was wry. Rachel said he looked broken when he came to her office to sign the retraction documents. Not angry or vengeful anymore, just sad and aware of everything he'd destroyed. Do you feel bad for him? A little. Mostly I feel relieved that he finally realized controlling people doesn't make them love you. She wrapped her hands around her own cup, a gesture Daniel recognized from all their previous conversations. I also got a promotion at work. My boss apologized for doubting me and said my dedication to honesty and integrity made me exactly the kind of person they wanted representing the organization. It's not a huge salary increase, but it's something. That's amazing, Lila. You earned that. We both earned some peace. She met his eyes directly. I missed you. These past few months without being able to talk to you. It reminded me how lonely I'd been before we met, how much your friendship actually meant to me. I missed you too, Daniel admitted. More than I probably should have. The admission hung between them, weighted with everything they still weren't saying. The attraction that had been there from the beginning. The connection that went deeper than simple friendship. The impossible question of what they might have been if their lives had been different, if timing and circumstances hadn't conspired to keep them in separate worlds. Lila seemed to hear all of it in his words. Her expression softened, turned almost melancholy. Daniel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without trying to fix it or change it, okay? Okay, see, I have feelings for you. Real feelings, not just gratitude or friendship, or the particular bond that comes from surviving something difficult together. When I think about you, when I imagine what my life could look like, you're in it, not as the pool guy who showed up on Tuesdays, but as someone who actually matters to me in ways I'm not supposed to feel. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. Lila, let me finish. She took a shaky breath. But I also know that acting on those feelings would be selfish and ultimately destructive. You have Emma to think about. You've built a stable life for her, and getting involved with me would complicate that in ways that aren't fair to her. And I'm still figuring out who I am outside of relationships, still learning how to stand on my own without needing someone else to validate my existence. We're not in a place where we can be together without hurting each other or the people around us. Then so what are you saying? I'm saying I care about you too much to let you make the wrong choice for the right reasons. I'm saying our friendship matters more than exploring what else we might be. I'm saying I choose you in my life as a friend rather than risk losing you entirely by trying to be more. Daniel felt relief and disappointment crash together in his chest. Because Lila was right. They both knew she was right. But that didn't make it any easier to hear. I have feelings for you too, he said quietly. I think I have since that first morning when you actually looked at me like I was a person instead of just the help. But you're right about Emma. She has to come first. She always has to come first. I wouldn't want you any other way. Lila reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture familiar and bittersweet. So we stay friends. We have coffee on Saturdays. We talk about our lives and support each other and prove that two people can care about each other without it having to turn into something romantic. Can we really do that? Can we just be friends when we both feel more than that? I don't know. But I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. You showed me what integrity looks like, Daniel. Let me show you that I learned the lesson. Let me choose what's right over what I want. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing what had just been said and agreed to. The coffee shop bustled around them with its normal Saturday afternoon energy. People on laptops, couples on dates, students studying in corners. Normal life happening while Daniel and Lila negotiated the boundaries of something that felt anything but normal. Tell me about Emma, Lila said finally, shifting the conversation to safer ground. How's first grade treating her? Daniel smiled, grateful for the redirect. She's thriving, obsessed with science experiments and convinced she's going to discover a new planet. Keeps asking me questions I can't answer about black holes and quantum physics. Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. She notices everything, reads emotions like a book. She knew I was sad when we stopped meeting, even though I tried to hide it. What did you tell her? That sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices about their friendships. That I was sad but would be okay. Daniel paused, then added, She said you made me happy, and she hoped I'd find a way to be happy again. Lila's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. She sounds incredible. You're raising an amazing human being. I'm trying. Most days I feel like I'm making it up as I go along and hoping I don't mess her up too badly. That's called being a good parent. The ones who think they have all the answers are the ones who do the real damage. They talked for another hour, falling back into the easy rhythm of their friendship, as if the forced separation had never happened. Lila told stories about her coworkers and the tiny apartment she was slowly making feel like home. Daniel shared updates about his route and his supervisor and the slow rebuild of his professional reputation after Marcus's retraction. They laughed and commiserated and remembered why this connection had felt so important in the first place. When it was time to leave, they walked out together without worrying about who might see them or what conclusions anyone might draw. On the sidewalk, Lila turned to Daniel with a smile that was equal parts fond and resigned. Same time next week? She asked. Wouldn't miss it. Good. She hugged him quickly, properly, the way friends do when they're saying goodbye with the certainty of seeing each other again. Take care of yourself, Daniel, and give Emma a hug from me. I will. You take care too. He watched her walk to her car, the same beat-up Honda she'd been driving since leaving Marcus, and felt something settle in his chest that he recognized as acceptance. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The knowledge that he'd done the right thing, even when the right thing came with the ache of roads not taken. The weeks that followed developed their own comfortable pattern. Saturday coffees became a fixed point in Daniel's schedule, something Emma knew about and asked about and seemed to accept as part of their normal routine. Lila became real to her through Daniel's stories, a friend who cared about her father and asked questions about Emma's life and sent occasional messages through Daniel telling Emma how proud she should be of her science experiments. Winter settled over the city, bringing rain and shorter days and the particular quiet that comes when the world turns inward. Daniel's work slowed slightly with the seasonal change, giving him more evening time with Emma. They decorated their apartment for the holidays, baked cookies that turned out lopsided but delicious, and built blanket forts in the living room while the rain drummed against the windows. One Saturday in mid-December, Lila showed up to the grind with news written all over her face. I got a job offer, she said as soon as Daniel sat down. A really good one. Marketing director for a nonprofit based in Seattle. Significant salary increase, great benefits. The kind of position that could actually turn into a career instead of just a job. That's incredible, Daniel said, meaning it even as something sank in his stomach. When would you start? They want me in January, which means I'd be moving right after the holidays. Lila's expression was complicated, excited and sad, and uncertain all at once. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? This is your decision, your career. You don't need my permission. I know. But you're my friend, and this friendship matters to me. Moving to Seattle would mean no more Saturday coffees, no more being able to see each other regularly. We'd be back to just phone calls and texts, and I'm not sure that's enough to maintain what we have. Daniel understood what she was really asking, whether their friendship was worth staying in a city where she had no ties beyond him, where her fresh start was still shadowed by Marcus's presence and the memories of everything that had happened. Whether he would ask her to stay, to choose him over this opportunity that could change her life. He thought about it, really thought about it, for a long moment. Then he took her hand across the table and met her eyes directly. You should take the job, he said firmly. This is the opportunity you've been working toward, a chance to build something that's entirely yours, in a place where nobody knows your history or has expectations about who you should be. You'd regret it forever if you stayed here for me. But what about us? What about our friendship? Our friendship will survive. It survived worse than distance. Daniel squeezed her hand. And honestly, maybe some distance would be healthy. We could figure out how to be friends without the constant temptation of wondering what else we might be. Phone calls and visits a few times a year, that's sustainable. That's something we can maintain without it becoming complicated. Lila's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to lose you. You won't. I promise you won't. But Lila, you need to choose your own life. Not the life that keeps you close to me. Not the life that's safe or comfortable. The life that challenges you and grows you and makes you into whoever you're supposed to become. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just a guy who knows what it's like to make choices based on what other people need instead of what you want. And I won't let you do that because of me. I refuse to be another Marcus, another person who holds you back from becoming who you're meant to be. She cried then, properly cried, and Daniel moved around the table to sit next to her, letting her lean against him while she processed what they both knew was the right decision. Other people in the coffee shop glanced their way, probably thinking they were a couple going through a breakup, and in a way they were, just not the romantic kind. When Lila finally pulled herself together, she wiped her eyes and managed a watery smile. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll take the job, but you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll keep being the amazing father you are. Keep showing Emma what integrity looks like. Keep being the kind of man who chooses right over easy, who treats people with dignity, who proves that good people still exist in the world. I promise. And promise me that someday, when Emma's older and you've got your life more settled, you'll find someone who deserves you. Someone who can actually be with you in all the ways I can't. Don't let what we had or didn't have stop you from finding that. Only if you promise the same thing. Promise me you'll find someone who sees you the way I do, who values you for who you are, who makes you feel like you matter. Deal. She hugged him tightly, and Daniel held her like he was trying to memorize the feel of her in his arms. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For choosing integrity when it would have been so easy not to. For being my friend even when it cost you. You changed my life. You changed mine too, Daniel said against her hair. More than you'll ever know. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about Seattle, about her plans for the move, about all the things she was excited and terrified to start. When they finally said goodbye on the sidewalk, they both knew it might be months before they saw each other again. The hug lasted longer this time, both of them reluctant to let go of something that had meant so much even in its limitations. Lila pulled back first, wiping her eyes again but smiling through the tears. I'll call you when I get settled, she said. You better. And I want to hear all about Emma's science experiments and your work and everything that happens in your life. Same goes for you. I want updates on Seattle and the new job and all of it. Deal. She started toward her car, then turned back one more time. Hey, Daniel? Yeah? Thank you for not kissing me that morning, for choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. That one choice. It saved both of us. I know, Daniel said. I know it did. He watched her drive away, watched until her car disappeared around the corner, and he was alone on the sidewalk with the winter afternoon growing colder around him. Then he got in his truck and drove to pick up Emma, carrying the bittersweet knowledge that he'd just said goodbye to someone who would always matter to him, who would always represent a road he'd chosen not to take. That night, Emma crawled into his lap while they were watching a movie, her small weight warm and solid against him. "Is your friend moving away?" she asked out of nowhere. "Yeah, sweetheart, she got a really good job in another city." "Are you sad?" "A little, but I'm also happy for her. Sometimes people need to go different places to become who they're meant to be." Emma thought about this with her characteristic seriousness. "But you'll still be my dad, right? You won't go anywhere?" Daniel held her tighter, struck again by how much this small person had lost already, and how fiercely she needed reassurance that he was permanent. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma, I promise you. You're stuck with me forever." "Good." She snuggled closer. "I like being stuck with you." "I like being stuck with you too, kiddo." 6 months later, Daniel's life had settled into a new normal. Lila had moved to Seattle and was thriving in her new role, sending regular updates and photos of her tiny apartment with its view of the Sound. They talked on the phone every few weeks, comfortable conversations that proved their friendship could survive distance and time. Emma was finishing first grade with straight A's and plans to be a marine biologist astronaut detective. Daniel had been promoted back to the premium route after Marcus Hart himself called Tom to recommend it, a final gesture of making amends that had surprised everyone. On a warm Saturday in June, Daniel was servicing a new property in Riverside Heights when his phone buzzed with a text from Lila. It was a photo of her at a coffee shop with a man Daniel didn't recognize, both of them smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Found someone who sees me. Thought you'd want to know. His name is David, and he's pretty great. Miss you, friend." Daniel smiled at the photo, feeling genuine happiness for her mixed with only the faintest echo of what might have been. He typed back, "He better treat you right or he'll have to answer to me. Happy for you, Lila. You deserve this." Her response came immediately, "You deserve it too. Don't forget that." Daniel pocketed his phone and went back to work, testing the chemical balance of water that sparkled perfectly in the afternoon sun. His life was good. Not perfect, not without its struggles and complications, but good. Solid. Built on choices he could be proud of and a daughter who made every sacrifice worthwhile. That evening, he picked Emma up from her friend's house and took her for ice cream, listening to her excited chatter about summer camp and swimming lessons and all the things she wanted to learn in the months ahead. She was growing up so fast, becoming more herself every day, and Daniel felt the familiar rush of gratitude that he got to witness it, that he'd chosen a life that kept him present for these moments, instead of chasing something that would have pulled him away. Some stories didn't end with people getting together. Some love stories were about choosing not to love, about respecting boundaries, and protecting what mattered most and proving that the strongest connections weren't always the ones you acted on. Daniel and Lila had found something rare, a friendship built on mutual respect, honest recognition, and the courage to walk away from what they wanted in favor of what they needed. They would always matter to each other. They would always be connected by those Tuesday mornings by the pool, by the conversations that had changed both their lives, by the choice they'd made together to honor something precious by not trying to possess it. And sometimes, in the quiet moments when Emma was asleep and the apartment was still, Daniel would think about a woman in Seattle who taught him that integrity meant more than convenience, that some people were meant to change your life without staying in it, that the line you didn't cross could be just as important as the one you did. He'd chosen right. They both had. And that was enough.